Michael will introduce the report.
Okay.
There is a video. I don't know whether that's going to be shown or whether it will be shown at the end of what I say or the beginning. I understand there is a video which may be played to committee members, but it's up to committee whether they want to see it or not.
Well, I appreciate the time, members, but I actually think it really illustrates the points. It only takes a few minutes.
We live there.
See the video.
Propaganda.
No, I don't really know. Oh, I have. Yes, I have. Yes, that's why I recorded it. You don't want to see it. I think it's important that we see this.
I can explain it very well if you don't want to see it, but it's up to you.
Could I explain it?
It doesn't. We do not hear that the majority of members wish to see the video. So if you would explain it, but I thought you had some photographs as well.
I do, yes.
Right. Right.
What my colleague is going to give you is basically the consultation leaflet, which is one of the appendices, and there is an additional photograph in there as well, which was taken recently of a vehicle parked in Milton Road. But essentially, it's what's already in the report, but it's just colour so you can see it much better. And I'm asking you to look at the photographs under where it says the title, "Current Problem." So I'll give my introduction now. Right, the parking review identified footway parking as an important issue for residents, and it was proposed to consult on a scheme for environmental improvements in Elm Grove. You have the scheme leaflet in your hands now, including changes to the road layout to deter footway parking and benefit all users. Last year, local ward councillor chaired community meetings which informed proposals put to residents earlier this year. About 800 residents in and around the streets were sent leaflets and questionnaires, and about 30 community groups and stakeholders were consulted. Residents did not support the proposals by about a two-thirds majority. It was made clear in the consultation material that the alternative would be no change, together with enforcement of the existing weighting restrictions and other highway issues such as obstruction and driving on footway. I mean, for example, there's a lot of commercial vehicles for sale, and there are lived-in vehicles, and there are other issues. Officers are preparing joint action with Sussex Police to manage and enforce all highway infringements, i.e. not just illegal parking. Elm Grove has a primary school, hospital and ambulance station, and is a link to the level. It has a relatively high number of traffic collisions for the volume of traffic that's in the report, and the number of parked vehicles has increased over the last 3 years, particularly illegally parked vehicles. I know that displacement is an issue for members, and the report does indicate that up to 70 vehicles may be displaced from double yellow lines and other yellow lines. And this morning I did I'm there in the road every day because my wife works at Brighton General Hospital, so I go every day, various times in the morning and in the evening. So I know the road very well. And also some of my fellow officers live in the road or in surrounding streets. For example, this morning at 20 to 9, in the roads above Wellington Street, this is on the north side, the Hartington Road side, within 50 yards of each junction, there are a total of 42 spaces unused. And this was at a time when commuters and people should probably have arrived in the area. So what my theory to that was that some residents may be parking on pavements in front of their houses, and quite naturally they would want to do that, on yellow lines near the junction, instead of parking around the corner where they can't see their vehicles. Again, you can understand that. But this report is for safety reasons and for improving the environment of the area, and that's why the recommendations are set out as they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Well, having looked at that picture, I went up there the other day and I recognise that. I'd say I think some of the pictures in the consultation are rather kind to the situation today. They fully express some of the dangers that you witness on a daily basis. I'll ask members to ask questions of the officer. Councillor Daniel. Councillor Sykes.
Thank you for the report. I just wonder if you'd say something about the thresholds for action, if you like, and you were talking earlier about smart enforcement and how that might form part of this enforcement.
Thank you. Yes. Enforcement is proposed where there are yellow lines, so enforcement would take place on all parking behind yellow lines at junctions. That is from the edge of the carriageway to the back of the footway, excluding any private forecourts. Also behind bus stops and behind zigzag lines. There is a distinction to be made here, and I need committee to be fully aware of the law on this position in the street. It is a civil offence which a penalty charge notice will be issued for parking behind yellow lines. There is no civil offence for parking on the footway as such. If the parking on the footway is causing an obstruction, then the police can act and issue a penalty. Also, driving on the footway or verge is an offence, and the police can again act, but they must witness the person driving. The proposed enforcement action would start in November, and there would be a concentrated week in which one of the days the police, abandoned vehicles officers, licensing officers, travellers liaison will come out. So it would be very much looking at the whole street and the issues in the street as a whole. When that occurs, there is likely to be, I would think, a stronger effect on the parking on the footway. People will maybe be deterred from parking on all parts of the footway. But in the longer run, as I said, a vehicle that's parked on the footway, not behind other lines, there is no action that can be taken under what is currently proposed. So it would not mean a total elimination of all parking on the widened footway in Elm Grove. I have to make that clear. There are some sections of the road on the north side near the traffic lights where there will be all parking will be removed. There's I think between two of the roads on the north side there's about 10 vehicles parked. They all have to go because it's yellow lines. But further down, for example, below Wellington Street, where cars are parked diagonally onto the footway, in the longer run, it would affect the larger vehicles because they would be causing an obstruction. And obstruction is basically where you can't get a double buggy through or you can't get a wheelchair through and someone is forced into the road or prevented from going through, and that will remain an offence. So we are dealing purely with the yellow lines and also driving on the footway and dangerous obstruction and that sort of thing.
Thank you. And I think it says in the report that it would impact only something like 70 out of the 200 to 300 odd vehicles that are experienced on the road, so not all of them. Councillor David.
Thank you. So it's a question about how about the process under which this consultation paper was arrived at. So there was an enforcement a couple of years ago, and that didn't happen, and a series of meetings took place. I just wondered if you could say something about that process, who was involved in it, please. Next.
I wasn't involved personally in that process. My understanding is that the process was initiated by Councillor Matt, or the ex-Councillor Matt Follett, and he consulted community groups. My understanding is he consulted Hanover Lat and the Elm Grove Residents Action Group. I've seen information on the Hanover Lat website to that effect. And out of that consultation came proposals for improvements in Elm Grove. I took those proposals for consultation in February and as well as consulting residents in and around the street, I also consulted 31 local stakeholders, including the Hanover Community Association and also the Elm Grove Residents Action Group, and several members of the Hanover LATs were also directly emailed about it as well. That was the process of consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Robbins.
Well, mine's a silly question, really. Down at the bottom here it says lamp columns and telegraph poles, but I can only count, I think, 5 lamp columns in the whole length of Elm Grove. Is that right, or have you just highlighted certain ones? And there's actually none on the south side of Elm Grove, and 1 telegraph pole.
You answer that one?
I didn't. This plan was given to me. It's accurate in terms of the width of proposed parking spaces. I cannot vouch for its accuracy in terms of recording the exact number of lamp columns or telegraph poles. I do know that there is a lot of street furniture there, a huge amount. I mean, it's an absolute minefield of street furniture in that street.
I think that was the point I was trying to make, that it was completely devoid of street furniture, particularly on the south side. There's a lot of trees, but
I think there is a lot's been introduced to create fences off the pavement with bollards and posts and cycle racks that are not needed for cycles that's being used to keep cars off the pavement. It's more street furniture and you know what to do with it. Councillor Beard, if you have a question.
Well, okay. I'm going to ask a question, well, 2 questions. Why are we yellow lines put down? We talked about the cost of paint and everything. Why have all the big poles? Why are they actually put down? If presumably looking at this, they're not enforced. 2, if I receive a ticket parking on a yellow line in another part of the city, could I defend this by saying, well, other people I know are parking on yellow lines in another part and it's not enforced? There seems to be a lack of consistency. I think that these are, yeah, I'll just think about that.
The yellow lines were put down in the 1980s. They were reviewed again more recently, I think in the last 7 to 10 years, and in some areas they were shortened because there was a review to see whether they were really necessary. And the reason why they were put down is largely to protect the junctions for road safety reasons. I completely agree about the need for consistency. I'm not speaking as a lawyer here, but I understand the power the council has is the discretion whether to enforce in certain areas, and obviously it's a resource base because it has been said earlier that we don't do the same level of enforcement outside of controlled parking zones that we do inside controlled parking zones. So there is an element of discretion, but from my point of view, I would agree that we should be enforcing everywhere.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, can I just build on that last question that Councillor Fairfield made? Because I was going to ask a similar question. I can remember when we were in administration, I mean this has been a hot potato for a long time, and I can remember there being a move to enforce, especially with the double yellow lines and people parked behind barriers, railings, those kind of things, and we had a big enforcement drive similar to the one we're talking about here. But that's waned. You know, it's all very well to have these drives, but how can we be sure that it's going to be ongoing? Because I can see as having a major drive to enforce all this, and then 2 years down the road, it's all going to creep back in again, unless it is maintained. And what you've just said about, you know, it being difficult because of parking enforcement and resources, etc. I'm not convinced that it's going to be maintained. How are we going to be sure it's going to be maintained?
I have put in the body of the report about the need to maintain this over time, particularly from the point of view of looking at road traffic collisions and other issues, because they need to be studied over a 3-year period. In my conversations with managers of the civil enforcement officers, I'm going out with them if this report is approved to look at the streets. We're doing this joint action. It is intended to carry it out, but obviously I'm only an officer. I can't vouch for what the council does in the future. But it should be maintained just as the verge parking is maintained, reports is maintained, should be maintained.
I haven't had any more questions indicated, so you're going for
I
a
just
break
want to
now,
make sure
yes?
you don't close it there.
No. Councillor Daniel, you wish to start the debate? Seems appropriate as the head of council. Oh, Chris, did you have a question?
We are on debate now. Yes.
Well, we will if I can identify that you haven't got a question.
Can I just correct something?
Pardon?
I need to just correct something, if I may. Can I correct something?
Yes, sorry. My colleague has pointed out to me that yellow lines in the area were reviewed last year. So there's been quite a recent review of yellow line to ensure that they have the right amount.
Okay, that's good to know. So, Chris, is it a question?
I was waiting for debate, yes.
You wish to make a contribution to the debate?
Yes.
Right, then Councillor Daniel is ahead of you.
Right. I was not sure she was asking.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to invite you to push for a refer back to officers for 12 months, and I have some, I think, pressing reasons why this committee should consider doing that. Only on Monday evening last week, just before the residents found out about the intention to take this action in Elm Grove, they had agreed, people who have had significant community that's been very divided on parking, had agreed at that meeting to move forward with a community questionnaire that they designed around moving forward on parking, which I thought was an incredibly positive step and a truly bottom-up approach. Then they found out that this was happening. They were absolutely livid because they felt it undermined the trust that they were putting in that process. However, they also voted on a motion to ask you to please consider deferring this enforcement action. I think that this will, I'm just begging to go that extra mile for this community. One of the other points I would like to make at this stage is throughout this committee we've heard how pushed for cash the council is, and I've given you 40 signatures directly by petition earlier in the meeting. You've had a motion by the area's local action team, which was passed unanimously with 6 abstentions. So there was no objections to that motion to ask you to please pause for 12 months. If that money is being asked for by residents elsewhere in the city to be spent this year, then I would ask you to consider prioritising that, and please give this community a chance to come up with a scheme that will be will be self-enforcing because people believe in it and they're committed to it. Please do not displace those 70 cars into already pushed streets and pressured streets and inflame the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hawtree.
Thank you very much, Chair. As clearly as Councillor Daniel said, it's been experienced over the weekend and like it before. It's been an area possibly situation, but I very much disagree. I've been thinking about this, the idea of deferring this. This is a subject, as Councillor Simpson has said, that's been going on under 2 previous administrations or more. And we've seen, again, with the CPZ, which is part of the problem in Hanover, that's not come in, so there's all the dependent problems that brings. And so previous administrations have not dealt with it. We're having to deal with this. And indeed, Alderman Edmund Smith, it was to her chagrin that this wasn't resolved. She's made no secret of that. And as Owen has said, what we're considering here is safety. It can lead to the A&E department, dare I say it can lead to the autopsy slab. I'm not speaking idly. We had very eloquently put from Southport Sir Nicholas Power's vivid description of the shoes are left behind, the body goes flying. Councillor Robbins has, in a way, painted himself into a corner earlier, both with the Southport Slade item and the one in Mile Oak. He pictured us sitting here and saying, why didn't we do something earlier? So this is now a chance to do something that wasn't done earlier by previous administrations. I think we can bring this in. It might save the hideous situation that was outlined by Mr. Powers. We've seen the pictures. Accidents by their very nature are unpredictable. It can happen, they do. But this is also to make Elm Grove better. We're not doing this in a draconian way. It should be part of the process that will then bring more with it to make Elm Grove better.
Trust the residents then.
So I think we've seen plenty of the what's proposed. I'm very happy that we take this forward, and it's a start of a continuing process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. I think there is a whole constituency here that is being ignored. These are the residents of the immediate Elm Grove area and the side streets. And we just need to go back a bit here. First of all, residents were asked if they wanted to be part of a very, very wide, very big residents parking scheme. The local councillors campaigned against it. The Green candidate, as was for the general elections, campaigned against it, whipped up quite a head of steam against it, and it was rejected, unsurprisingly. Then a previous councillor, with the best of intentions, sat down and tried to find a way through this, and brought forward a second scheme on paper that was sent out for people to have a look at, with the paragraph saying, if you don't like this, then we're going to move straight to enforcement. Okay, that's one way to do things, but that is one way to fuel anger in a community and chaos, to be honest. Now, what I support Emma, because what she's asking for you to do is to defer this report. We don't condone the illegal parking practices in Elm Grove at all. And we totally take on board the point that Geoffrey Theobald was making about consistency. The council has to enforce parking law consistently. It can't turn a blind eye in one area and not in another. And now I think residents have actually got that message, and they're not stupid, they actually understand that. What we're asking you to do is to go that extra mile, to give a bit of breathing space for officers, with ward councillors, to work up a genuinely resident-led scheme, which would have the backing of the majority. You will never get 100%, the backing of the majority of people, because then, as Councillor Simpson mentioned, you will then get proper sustainability and enforcement, because it will then be adhered to, but you have to get the buy-in of residents. And so, Chair, I would advise you to refer this report back to officers. I do think it's worth just going that extra mile. You might even end up with something that looks remarkably a little bit like this. But I think residents know, and I think we know, that the current situation cannot continue and will not continue. And therefore, I'm looking for your agreement, as is Emma and Alan, for you to just step back and give residents one more chance to work with you properly to bring something forward.
Well, I'm very interested, Councillor, that you say the current situation can't continue, and therefore we must all agree that the situation is unsafe. Now, are you actually offering an amendment to the recommendations, because they don't offer us the option of deferring this?
Sorry, Chair, you can defer it. You have the power as Chair to move that the report is deferred.
You've specified for certain purposes, for a certain period of time, and I think that isn't really covered by me just choosing to offer that. So, we haven't got an amendment. I have Councillor Cox, who I'll speak next.
Yes, I appreciate this is a very sensitive matter in Elm Grove and Hanover, and I think all the members of the committee would have received passionate emails from people urging that vehicles continue to be allowed to park in this way, and equally passionate emails contact from people, disabled people, parents with buggies and things who were being forced to walk into the road because they can't get by the cars. The fact is that we're the Environment, Transport and Sustainability Committee, the Transport Committee of Brighton and Hove City Council, and we're the elected councillors. And we now have before us a report which describes a situation which has been reached over a number of years, where it's become custom and practice for cars and vans to be parked on the pavement, cars and vans to be driven along the pavement, cars and vans to obscure views from junctions. And what effectively, and we're now being presented in written form, we would have seen a video, which I suspect would have shown some quite horrifying situations. And we're now being presented with that as councillors. And we're effectively being asked by, it appears by the Labour group, to say, actually, just ignore it, just leave it. Just let people carry on. Just let people carry on driving along the pavement. Let people carry on parking on junctions. Let people carry on parking right by bus stops in the way we've seen. For another year, whilst we work out what can be done. I don't think that is a tenable, responsible approach. Now we have this information in front of us. Should a child be run down by a car next month driving along the pavement? What position does that put us in? We would have effectively said, we know this is going on, but we would have taken a deliberate decision to not enforce the law, which is quite clear when it comes to things like that. We would have taken a deliberate decision as a set of councillors to allow effectively to connive with that activity. And I just don't think that's a tenable position for us to be in. How we got here, we can debate and argue about, but that is where we are. And I think what you're proposing is frankly irresponsible, and there's no way I can support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sykes.
Eloquent description of the situation by Councillor Cox. I was up there the other day, and as I'm sure many of us were, walking up and down Elm Grove just to sort of see what's happening out there. And there was some complete chaos. Cars parked behind railings across junctions, everything we've heard about, and some perfectly reasonable parking on the footway, which used to be grass vert. It's since been paved over, and I think that's absolutely key in this. And we go back to what Owen was saying about the thresholds and the smart enforcement. This is about safety for pedestrians up and down, and road users in the interest up and down Elm Grove. And so I mean, and I think we can't forget that. And oh yes. I'll leave it there. Everything's been said. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Robbins.
Well, firstly, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Audrey on a previously unknown talent he has for mind reading, because he said I'd painted myself into a corner before I'd actually expressed any sort of opinion on it. So if you ever lose your seat, there's probably you could take up an act in a musical somewhere, I should think. What I actually said about Southport State was that we should listen to the community, the people that were there. People come along and passionately argue their case. And I simply said that I think that we should listen to the people in that community, as I think we should listen to somebody like Emma, who lives in the community, represents the community, and to what I can see has come up with a perfectly reasonable solution.
I raised it down here twice, Councillor Morgan said about the two situations he mentioned. So, and I just wanted to come back. He said I was mind reading. In fact, I was sort of a journalist writing something down.
Right, calm down. Right.
Well, there's a long history to this, as we know. It goes back many years across many administrations, and there was going to be enforcement 2 years ago, and it was agreed with the local community to step back and work on a solution, and that's exactly what happened. A working group with residents, with representatives from LATS and the people that have been involved in the campaigns for years, worked to try to come up with a solution, and the solution that was consulted on is what was agreed, was what came out of that process. So I don't see what difference is going to happen, what different would happen now. You know, the options would still be the same. You know, there are very limited options for formalising parking on Elm Grove, which is exactly what this solution as presented to the local community does. So we do have a deteriorating situation, and just an example, I've been contacted 3 times over the last few months by somebody that runs a shop on Elm Grove asking me to come and explain to him why we allow people to drive past on the pavement past his shop, and he will talk about incidents where those cars driving past his shop have collided or nearly collided with pedestrians, with children in pushchairs, and we hear it so often, it's a tragedy waiting to happen. So we just cannot allow this to continue. Every effort has been made to try and find an amicable solution, but that has not been possible, unfortunately. So I think we really have no choice with what's presented before us, but to go ahead, start to enforce. But that can go alongside work with the local residents, work with the local community to identify a holistic solution for the whole area, which is absolutely what needs to happen. As many people have said, this isn't the only incident area where there's problematic parking in the area, and it all needs to be looked at, and it all needs to be dealt with. And I hope very much that that process can now take place. But I just don't think we're in a position, given the information that is before us, where it is tenable or defendable for us to allow it to continue.
Stitch up. Thank you. Now, I'm only taking members that haven't spoken in the debate before. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chair. No, I hadn't entered the debate before. I mean, I'm really struggling with this, I have to be honest, but I've listened to what other members have said, and it really concerns me when I hear things like, we're going to start to enforce. We should have been enforcing a long time ago. We've got the double yellow lines. We've got a picture in front of us of a van parked on a corner with double yellow lines all around it. Why have we not been enforcing? And as Councillor Davies just said, he's had a phone call from a shopkeeper saying, why do we allow them to drive down the pavement? Well, why do we allow them? Why have we allowed them to drive down the pavement? I'm really, really struggling with this. I've got a certain empathy with Emma and her request from the community to look at this bottom up, because this is such a long-term problem that unless there is hard enforcement for ongoing forever and ever and ever, we're going to be back in the same situation in probably 18 months or 2 years' time. We haven't been enforcing here. So as I said before when I was asking questions, how can I be assured that enforcement, if it's going to have to be enforcement, how is it going to be ongoing? Because I can't see this being a long-term solution if you haven't got the buy-in from the community.
Thank you. Councillor Theo.
Yeah, would I be right in saying, would I be right in saying, or assuming, that if we pass these recommendations, the first recommendation is to do nothing, and the second recommendation is to enforce what we should have been enforcing?
The subtlety in the second recommendation, Councillor Kadash, was really that we are agreeing to a cooperative operation between our enforcement officers and the police. Otherwise, we could have not needed to bring a report. But I think the point has been expressed is that this is a long-running issue, and it was important that we, as a committee, placed ourselves with a stage.
You're confirming my reading of it, but so on that basis, Councillor Daniel can go on as the other board councillors, working with their residents on a long-term scheme, as I understand it. And I would have said, I'm slightly surprised that, having been a member of the police authority for years, as I have been, I find it extremely difficult, frankly, not to be. If we put in yellow lines down, there must be a reason for it. Why do we put them there? So how can you... I find it difficult not to actually vote for the recommendations, because the recommendations none of us here should be condoning, oh, well, let's take all the yellow lines out, take everything out, and have a free fall.
Okay.
I think the argument's not been made for a reason.
Your mic has gone off. I don't know if there was a time on it.
No.
Right. Has any member not spoken that wishes to spoken in the debate? That is. Okay. My closing remarks on this are, and I think Jeffrey's actually got another of this. We don't need permission of the committee not to implement a scheme that residents have rejected. We don't. That first recommendation is purely to note the outcome of that consultation. And I think it's a great pity that members of the community didn't support that scheme, because that would have been
Because it was
a
top
good
down.
solution for the problems there.
Because it was top
The
down.
second point is we don't have to give officers permission to enforce the law, but we are giving our consent here to a package with the police, which I think it was important to bring this report both to understand the outcome of the consultation and to endorse that activity and what we'd like to do. But not necessary to do it. We didn't need to have, we didn't need to give them permission. I think that we have given ample opportunity for grassroots conversations and building of schemes, as Councillor Davey has expressed. This whole proposal came out of long discussions with the community, and unfortunately, 900 households were consulted, and the responses came back at 2/3 saying no. Now, we absolutely can continue to have dialogue with the community. Meanwhile, we have a responsibility for road safety, and we need, and the legality of the situation, to see that people that are day in, day out, being endangered, are no longer facing that from things that we can prevent. So, Mark, this is me making contributions to the debate.
Stop preaching.
So, I'm completely behind the recommendations, but what I would finally say is, Councillor, please, what I would finally say is what would be extremely welcome coming from the community in their dialogues now is a proposal and evidence of their support for a proposal, that something that they would be prepared to get around. That is what we actually need to see. Yes, and I would like to see the leadership of members like Councillor Daniels and the board to bring that about. I think that would be a fantastic thing. But we've had countless proposals put to the community that have been rejected. And now we have to enforce the law. So we'll put the recommendations to we have to enforce the law.
It'll cost you.
It's got to be safe. Right, those in favour of the recommendation. Councillor Simpson? No? Okay. Those against? Okay. Those abstaining? Okay. Recommendations are agreed. And I would very much welcome seeing